All right, everyone, Unwoven Music here, and today I'm going to go through the process that I use to create Dolby Atmos mixes. And if you're not familiar, a Dolby Atmos mix is a spatial audio. It's allowing you to mix music in 3 dimensions. So let's just kind of get into it here. Hopefully you know a little bit about Dolby Atmos. A lot of people talk about Dolby Atmos, and seems like most of the people that are using Dolby Atmos or releasing with Dolby Atmos are using Apple's Logic DAW or Pro Tools, and you don't really hear a lot about Ableton. Sure, it's out there. You've got a few YouTube videos that are pretty helpful and demos and things like that. But I was pretty blind when I started this process about 2 years ago, and I've learned so much since. And so what I wanted to do today is kind of go through my process for mixing in Dolby Atmos. And I've also created a tool to kind of make things a lot easier. It's an online tool and will help you set up your Ableton project to be mixed in Dolby Atmos quickly and easily, and without a lot of fuss. So let's kind of get into the process here and talk about how projects are going to get set up typically, and then I'll show you the tool and how you can kind of get things going and get your mix into the Dolby Atmos renderer quickly. So this is just a quick Ableton project. This is actually a demo project that I use for the Dolby Atmos tool that I wrote, but I thought it'd be good to use this because it's pretty basic. This project actually uses all native Ableton devices, so there are no third-party plugins as it sits right now. We're going to change that because we're going to use the Dolby Atmos Panner and a few other plugins to get this set up with Dolby Atmos, right? So in order to mix music in Dolby Atmos, you need a DAW, and then the next thing you need is the Dolby Atmos Renderer, which is this. And with that, when you set up the Dolby Atmos Renderer, you're going to set up, it's going to set up an audio device called the Dolby Atmos Bridge. So you're going to send your audio to that. In the renderer, my input device is the Dolby Atmos Bridge, and then my output is the speakers or the devices that you're using. I'm recording all of this, so I've got some loopback and stuff like that. Now, currently I'm mixing in stereo, so I'm still using the Dolby Atmos renderer, but it's folding everything down into stereo. This is what that looks like. So you can mix in spatial audio and you can mix in Dolby Atmos without 15 speakers, right? Or in a 7.1.4, that would be 11 speakers, 12 speakers, right? So you don't necessarily need that. Now, it's going to be very helpful for you to hear your mix in a real Dolby Atmos environment. So there's a few different ways to do that, and there's a lot of tutorials online for that. But you can either, buy a bunch of speakers and have the sound card that can handle all of those outputs. You can use a certified Dolby Atmos studio. Some of them will even let you come and bring your own computer and hook up your own computer to their audio network and work with that. Or you can kind of start off playing around with things in the Dolby Atmos renderer in stereo or in binaural using headphones. Either way, it's fun to work with, but right now we're not actually doing very much. We've got a stereo mix here. Everything's going through to the master, as you can see, and the master is going through channels 1 and 2. Now the output for Ableton, this is going to the Dolby Atmos Bridge, which is sending that audio to the renderer. So you can see that here. You come back to the renderer and you can see it coming through channels 1 and 2. Don't be too alarmed if it clips. That's because your audio is pretty hot for the renderer, so it's going to limit that a little bit here. And that's just kind of part of the process. You'll bring that down as you actually get into the Atmos mix and your audio moves around a little bit into the different spaces. So let's kind of get into it. and I'll show you real quick how I would typically set up a Dolby Atmos project without the tool, and then we'll show you with the tool. So the first thing I usually do is kind of go through each individual track, and there's a plugin that comes with the Dolby Atmos Renderer, which, by the way, is free on a trial. I think after the trial expires, obviously you'll have to pay for it, but it gives you a chance to kind of play with things and see if you really want to get into this. But yeah, you load up your DAW, you set your set things to the Atmos bridge, and then you use this Dolby Atmos Panner plugin. And right now it's not configured at all, so you still have audio coming through in stereo, 2 speakers, right? But you can kind of see here, it's detecting the audio in these little pan plugins. So what we want to do is we want to set this object pair to 11 and 12, and those represent objects 11 and 12. So you can move them around a little bit here. You can, mirror them. You can set up the mirroring in different ways. Most people will set it to mirror X. I like to use a variety of different methods, but this still doesn't get us to the point because we still have our audio going to the master, which is channels 1 and 2, which represents the left and right bed tracks in the renderer. If we actually want it to go to the object, you have to set the external out as the same as the Dolby Atmos plugin. Okay, so we see the plugin, object pair 11, 12, and then external out 11 and 12. And then we hit play, and we can hear the drums still, but the drums are actually coming through on these individual objects. And so if we had a full Dolby Atmos rig set up, where we have 7 speakers on the floor and 4 speakers up high, you would hear those drums move back and forth depending on the positioning here, right? That's great. That's basically the gist of Dolby Atmos. You can do that for each one of these tracks, and then your audio will be in here and mixed as such. So there's still a little more to it. So I'm going to go through a couple other concepts. First things first is the LFE that we talked about. LFE stands for low frequency effect. So what I like to do is set up this LFE return bus and then send my low frequency signals to that channel. So my kick drum and my bass guitar, low sub bass and things like that. It's a lot of debate on whether to use LFEs in music or not. I like to use it because I write mostly bass music, so I want to make sure that that bass comes through. But there's a few different gotchas, and you should definitely read up on that. Some people recommend not using the LFE at all because most consumer Dolby Atmos systems will have automatic bass management that will send those bass signals to your subwoofer, even if they're in the left and right speakers. For me, I personally think that it's important for people to feel my music through the bass, and we're not talking about any latency between these channels. They should be the signals should be happening simultaneously. So I don't see a lot of phasing issues, assuming that your speakers are aligned properly. That's a lot to say. I use LFE. Read up on it if you want to know more. So the LFE track, again, goes to the LFE bed, which is channel 4. That represents that single speaker. Now, Dolby Atmos won't automatically roll a low-pass filter on that. So most engineers will set a low-pass filter to 120 hertz. And then now I can send my bass, sub-bass, and my kick to that. And you can see that coming through. And then in the renderer, we can see it here coming through on the LFE channel. Now again, if we had the full mix, and what I'll try to do is I'll show you what that would look like in the video here, you would see the full range of different speakers that you have in your environment. For recording purposes, I'm in stereo right now, but you would see that, and then you would feel that come through that subwoofer. The Dolby Atmos Renderer does not have a bass management system, so if you do not send audio to the LFE channel, you will not hear the bass through your subwoofer. Okay, so that's important to note. I like bass a lot, so I think that's pretty important. What we're going to do right now is first set up, we've got our LFE going to the LFE channel, and then I want to set up a couple tracks with the Dolby Atmos panner. So I'm going to set up the Dolby Atmos panner on the bass track as we did before, so 13 and 14 for that one, and then we'll set the external out. I'm not going to do all of the tracks because that would take kind of a long time, and I want to get to the tool that I want to show you. Let's do the mid-bass lead. So let's do that on 15 and 16, and the E-piano on 17 and 18. And you kind of see here why this would take a pretty long time. 15 and 16. E-piano, 17 and 18. So we're going to add the panner, set the 17 and 18. And I'm not going to worry too much about what position these are going to be in for now. But you can kind of see those tracks are now coming through each individual object here, and you can see it in the panner here, or in the renderer here. So I'll set those here so you can kind of see the separation. Let's go to the part that actually has. You can see that stuff located there. Now, what I want to talk about now is mastering. And mastering in stereo, I want to say it's easy, but it's easier because you're only dealing with two speakers. What do you do when you don't have a master bus where everything comes together and you can add compression and limiting and EQ for all of those tracks? Now you've got all these tracks as individual objects going out to the renderer, and you have no control over the overall signal of the mix, right? And you want your mix to be loud. You want it to be maybe not even loud, just maybe a little, just a little more oomph. You want that kick to really kick. You want to EQ the highs a little bit and bring them up, or cut maybe a frequency, and you want to limit so that you're not pushing too hard, right? Well, I can't do that with a typical compressor. Or mastering suite, right? You can't just put something on the master channel because these tracks are not going through the master channel. My drums are going through, the kick is obviously going through the LFE, but it's going through these two object channels. So this company called Hornet created this plugin called SAMP. And what this is it's a bus mastering, so like an equalizer, a compressor, a clipper, and a limiter. That allows you to put it on individual channels, and it will bring the audio signals of all of those channels into the plugin, and then use that as the signal for the compressor and compress all of those channels at the same time. So if we add to the bass and the mid bass lead and the E-piano, and then we select all, right? We can select all or none. Now we've got all of that audio coming through all of those channels. You can kind of see that here. So now we can come through and start compressing, or start clipping, or if we want to add some EQ, we can do that, whatever we want to do. Okay, so that's how we basically do mastering in Dolby Atmos. I'm new to this, so I do want to mention that I'm not an expert. There's probably a lot of people that have been doing this a lot longer. I've done 2 full releases in Dolby Atmos. I hope to do a lot more. But this is kind of my process and what I've learned over time. So as you can see, this is all really a bit tedious. It's a lot of work to get this all set up just to start mixing in Atmos, right? And honestly, it's a little bit discouraging, especially if you have a really big project with a lot of tracks. You're starting to look at things like side chaining, right? If you've got a kick drum from your drums, side chaining for all of your synthesizers, you got to think about how that's all going to work when those synthesizers are no longer grouped and now they're individual tracks that go straight to objects. My tool doesn't solve for that, but what I would typically do is if I would, were to have a side chain effect on a group here, that would be side chain to a kick. I'll move that actually to each individual track, so that the side chain affects each one, and the settings will typically be the same so that it's the same effect. It's a lot more to manage, and it's a lot more to think about as you're doing your mix, but it's really the best way to do it. So yeah, that's really the process. Again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but now let's take a look at how I'm going to do this with the tool. When you come to this als-atmos-tool.unwoven.net, this is basically going to do a lot of that work that we just did for you, or at least allow you to set it up in a little more of an intuitive way, and then reload the project with the panner and all of those settings in place. So at that point, you just add a few more things. So I'm going to go ahead and use the demo project. So what we were just working with is the same Ableton project as the demo project that you can use yourself. So here it is. When you upload your track, you're going to see all of the individual tracks listed out, and you can kind of see the different groups we have here. And you can show what devices are in each track and kind of show what what the type of each track is. We've got our return tracks here. You've got some MIDI tracks. Don't have any audio tracks on here because we used that those native devices for this. I wanted to provide a way that everyone could easily use without having to download any audio to just try it out. So I'm going to turn off this show panner button. That's important because it will allow you to set the pan settings for each individual track. But what I like to do first is set up my individual object tracks, figure out what that's going to look like, and then go from there, right? So I can go through each one of these and determine what I want to do. For the drums, I'm going to go ahead and set up individual objects for the kick, the hat, and the snare. So what this means is the kick is coming through objects 11 and 12, the hats are coming through 13, 14, and the snares 15 and 16. Another thing that you could do is you could set it up so the whole group goes through as an object, and that way it's fully mixed as a stereo object that you can then now move around. But I like to have a little bit more control. There's not a lot of placement that I set for these, but I like to put the hats a little further back so that there's kind of some spacing there. What's nice about Ableton, and Ableton only has stereo tracks. You can't do mono tracks. You could do mono inputs, but the result is a stereo track. You can set up your Adobe Atmos panner with one object or two objects, right? An object pair. I like that because it still gives you that panning ability. So if you wanted to set up an auto pan or something like that, it will move around in that space however you set it up. So that's kind of nice. So the bass track is going to be an object. You're going to find that most of this stuff is going to be objects. So I'm going to set all my tracks. My effects, I want them, my effects aren't too, developed yet. So if we look at my track here, I've just got them here and here. I don't really think I care too much about where the individual objects will be placed. So I'm just going to set the group as an object and leave the rest. So talking about a return track, some engineers will actually use beds for reverbs, and that gives you a way to set up maybe an environment where a reverb comes through all the speakers, or maybe it comes through just your front speakers or just your height speakers, but all four of them or all six of them, however you want to do it. And actually beds only uses two of those height speakers. I like to use objects pretty exclusively, so I'm going to set these to objects. If you were to use beds, there are ways to do that with Ableton, but obviously you can only set up one send and return for a stereo track. So that means you can only have two channels as your object. There are some hacks and plugins that allow you to do it with multiple tracks. One of them is using a plugin, I believe it's called Binaural. And it's kind of a cool way that you can reroute everything to multiple tracks. So if you wanted to send a reverb to all of your speakers in Ableton, you could do that with that. And I would just Google that. I'll link it down below or comment about that. So those are all my object tracks, right? Everything's pretty much set up. But now I actually want to take some time to set up my initial placement. And that's where this show panner button comes in handy. So basically this is the panner kind of in a quick and dirty UI. So I'm going to set my kick and leave it where it is. And my snare as well. I'd like to maybe move that a little bit towards the middle. and that's going to activate that center speaker a little bit more for my snare, and the kick is just going to come through those mains, right? For my hi-hats, I like those to, like I said, to be a little bit off into the room, meaning they're going to be coming through my main speakers, at least my left and right, and then my left and right surround speakers, right? Now you'll notice that I'm mostly sticking to on the wall, and that's pretty common for engineers to do that. You can set things in the middle of the room like this, but sometimes what happens is you end up with phasing issues when you kind of move around a little bit, and it kind of sets you up for a little bit of kind of confusion for the listener. So people will usually recommend keeping things on the wall. For my bass, I'm going to set them here and just leave them there. For that mid bass lead, I want to be in a little bit in the middle of the room. Let's do the E piano. I want that to be above. So I'm going to hit this Z height, and that's going to put it in the top speakers. So set the Z level all the way up. My arpeggiator, I want it to be a little bit in the middle of the room, but I kind of want it to be a little bit in front of me on the left and a little bit behind me on the right. So I'm going to set the mirror direction to be diagonal, and this sets it up so that you can kind of do things like this, right? That's kind of fun. I like my keys sometimes to be in the height speakers, but I think in this case I'm going to set them a little bit over here. My effects, I kind of want to be up above me, so I'm going to set them on the heights and then to kind of be in the middle. And this is going to, in a 7.1.4 system, it's going to place them on both the front and the back speakers. So it's going to kind of sound like it's coming from the middle above you, right? If you had a 7.1.6 or 9.1.6 system, it would only be in those speakers above you. Okay, now let's talk about reverbs. I almost always like to put these on height, sometimes behind me a little bit. And again, I'm not, it kind of depends on what you're doing, and you can kind of play with this once you get it back into the renderer. I want this one, let's set this one to be behind me just for fun. We'll set this one to be height, and we'll put that, leave that there, and then let's actually put this one on a vertical mirror, and let's set this one up on a XY mirror and put it right there. Cool. So that's basically everything. When I click start processing, it's going to do three things. It's going to take that project that I uploaded, add the Dolby Atmos panner. It's going to set the panning for each one of those objects. It's going to set the channel output on the Ableton track to the same object as the panner, and then it's going to add that SAMP plugin. And after that, there's a little more configuration we'll need to do, but we'll be pretty much ready to go to start mixing my full track in Dolby Atmos. So I'm going to click start processing, and it's going to take a couple seconds, and then it'll download the file, and we'll be able to load it into the Ableton project. Okay, we're now loading the downloaded ALS file into our project. Again, we're not using any external plugins or any audio in this project, so it's fine to actually use it directly from the downloads folder. But if you're using your own project with all sorts of samples and drum racks and audio files and things like that, you're going to want to put this back into your project folder. And it's named as a separate file, so it should just go along just fine. So yeah, this is the project, and let's expand all this out. Our drum track, our kick drum track here, we've got our Dolby Atmos panner. So you can see the position is exactly where we put it. Let's look at the hi-hats, and they're in the middle here, which is what we told the program to do. It also added this Hornet SAMP plugin. Now notice that at least right now, all the tracks are not engaged. So I'm going to click the all button. And then finally, it set the routing for each individual track that we delegated as an object track to the appropriate output. So all the way up to your individual send and returns. Now again, I want to set up my LFE track and then add my filter and then set that to 120. And then I'm going to send my kick and my bass to that. Easy peasy. and then we're pretty much ready to go. Now, if you're in a room with an Atmos rig, now is the time that you get to start listening and mixing and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of shrink this down over here, go to the Atmos Panner, set our output level, and then I'm just going to hit play. As you can see here, we've got our Atmos Panner representing the signals exactly where we place them. Let's skip to this part where it starts to kick. And there it is. Everything is in place where we told it to be. And again, if you're in a room with an Atmos rig, you'll hear it coming through those individual speakers. And I'll show you here, I'm in stereo right now, but I'll kind of show you what it looks like if this were in a Dolby Atmos rig with the panner. From here, we can start looking at our compression. Maybe we want to add a little bit more high end, right? Just a touch to bring out some of those highs. I'm going to want to add some master bus compression just to kind of give it that oomph. And there's all sorts of settings on here that you can tweak. The clipper can bring up the gain a little bit more. And then you've got your limiter here. If you want to limit the signal a little bit, you can do that. Typically, the Dolby Atmos Renderer will want to see 18 integrated level for LKFS. That's what this number is right here. So that's what your target is going to be for Dolby Atmos to be mixed to deliver to your distributor. Now, I use DistroKid, and DistroKid will take the Dolby Atmos file, which is called an ADM BWF file, and upload that file to DistroKid, and then it will distribute that full Dolby Atmos mix on, Tidal, Apple Music, and all of those Dolby Atmos services. Once you're kind of done with the mix, you can do a lot more. There are a few different things that you're going to need to do. One of those things is set up what's called timecode, and this also comes with the Dolby Atmos Renderer. Unfortunately, there's not an AU plugin for it that works in Ableton, but basically what I do is I set up a track and this LTC generator, which is basically a timecode audio generator. What this does is it will generate a timecode track that goes to track 129, right? Let's bring this out of the effects group and put it right here. So we're going to send this track to external out 129. And 129 is the designated channel for timecode. And what that does is it makes sure that when you press the play button, wherever you are in your track gets reflected on the time inside of the renderer. So you see that this says 30 seconds. If I don't have that enabled, then it doesn't know where we are in the track, and I can't actually record, right? So you're going to want to make sure you have that. Now, typically, I don't like to use the Dolby timecode generator. I use a WAV file that has timecode. Also, don't send this signal to your speakers. It is loud, it's annoying, it's going to wake up everybody in the neighborhood. Just don't do it. Make sure you send that to track 129 right away. So that's good to go. We're going to need that to render our final mix. Basically, when we're ready to go and we have everything laid down and we're ready to press this to the proverbial vinyl, we hit this record button and we set the sync button here and then hit play, and then it will actually record the audio into the master track. Okay. So once that's done, you can play that back in the renderer, and that's good to go. The last thing that is something to mention is the binaural settings. So what you'll typically do is you'll set up the binaural settings plugin on the master channel. And what binaural is the fold down into a stereo mix that has the Atmos signals on it and kind of positions things magically in your headphones in a binaural format. So it seems like when you have your headphones on, that something that's far in front of you is actually in front of you, and something that's above you is above you. And they use phasing and some reverbs and things like that, or something to achieve that. At this point, I don't think Apple Music uses the binaural mix at all, but it's still good to really hear your mix in the binaural format. So when you have your mix ready to go, typically what I'll do is I'll go through each track and place the position. Typically drums and bass and things like that, you'll either want that to be off or in the near position. And then when you're talking about things like reverbs and things that are meant to be far away, those will be mid and far. And that just kind of tells the binaural mix where to place things in those headphones, right? And so you go through each one of those, you set the settings for that, and there's always more to learn and more to do. But once you have all of that there, your mix is pretty much done. Make sure it sounds good though in every single format. So typically what I'll do is I'll listen to my track in the physical environment of 2.0, right? Which is 2 speakers, 2.1, 2 speakers with the subwoofer. I will use the renderer to hear it in 5.1, 7.1, and then 7.1.4. So you just kind of want to check things in each format and make sure that it sounds good before you send it off. When you feel like you have a good mix and it sounds pretty good in all of those different formats, that's when you can start to do the render, right? So that's, you go to export audio here, and ADM BWF is the final Atmos mix. That's what you're going to send to DistroKid or whatever your distributor is, and that's what's going to end up on Apple Music. That can end up being a very large file because you've got, all of these different objects, each of which is wave format file in stereo, 48 kilohertz. So it ends up usually being, a gigabyte or two of data that you send off. So yeah, you're going to want to do that. And then you're also going to want to, usually what, that usually when you come up with a mix in stereo or any other format, you want to hear it in different environments. So your car and your, if you have a home stereo system that has surround sound capabilities, or even if it doesn't, you're going to want to hear what that sounds like. A lot of engineers are going to use a separate mix for their stereo mix. So they're going to take their full track and mix it in stereo 2.0, and then do a separate mix in Dolby Atmos. That's a lot of work for me. I like to do things once and be done. So typically what I will do is I'll mix in Dolby Atmos and then use the re-renders that fold down into the stereo mix. So what I'll do is once I feel good about my mix, I hear it in all those different formats that are on, in my studio. Then I'll go over here to export audio and re-renders, and export that stereo mix, and then listen to it in my car and in my home entertainment system and on a little Bluetooth speaker, and every single environment that people are going to listen to. So I will say that if you're planning on using your Dolby Atmos mix to release also a stereo mix, you're going to have your ADM file, and then you're going to have your stereo wave file, right? And what's important about that to know is that when you do that, you want to set your trim, downmix trim to 0 dB. By default, the renderer will be set, I believe, to 3.0. You want to bring that down to 0 dB and save that. And in the renderer version 5, once you save those settings, you should be good to go for life, right? So yeah, that's pretty much that. That's most of everything. So again, now you've got your mix, you've got your stereo mix, your ADM mix. You listen to both. Inevitably, you're going to be faced with a situation where you're like, oh man, that kick doesn't quite hit as hard as I thought it would in the stereo mix, and I want it to, right? Well, you might end up having to trade some things off. And keep in mind, more people are probably going to listen to your stereo mix on Spotify than are going to listen to your Atmos mix in a full 9.1.6 environment, right? Hopefully that will change, and maybe, all of us will have all these environments. I think it's a pretty exciting time for Dolby Atmos. There are so many people doing so many things, and there is such a great community of people that are willing to learn and teach And I will say that right now, there aren't a lot of rules. With stereo mixing, there are a lot of things where people say you should set this to that, you should do this, you should do that. With Dolby Atmos, there are surefire opinions, and there are some rules that people will talk about. But I think that it's still up in the air. If you hear something that's a rule, they say rules are meant to be broken. Maybe try it out, see what happens. And maybe you'll find out there's a reason that it's a rule, right? But this is really an exciting format. It's a lot of fun to work with. I want to also say that I'm definitely not the expert here. This is my process. This is what I have found to work for me. I don't have a million listens on Apple Music or Spotify. That's okay. I make music for fun. I do this because I love the technology and I love working with sound. So it's really exciting. But there are a lot of other people that have been doing this for longer, that do it as a profession. For me, this is kind of a side thing. I love doing it and playing around with the stuff and in my free time. So, I'll leave a few different comments in my description or in the comments below, depending on where I post this. Do try out the Ableton Dolby Atmos tool. It's free to use. I don't see why you wouldn't use it. I don't, I have a privacy policy down here that says, I don't really want your music or anything like that. That's just, just wanted to share this with the world. And I want to also really encourage people to try this out. I mentioned this before. A lot of people out there are using Dolby Atmos with Logic and, New Window and Pro Tools. And, people kind of shy away from it with Ableton. Ableton doesn't have multi-channel tracks, so you can't do a 5-speaker output on a single track. Or you can't set up a bed natively to go to 12 speakers. And that's something we kind of have to figure out, and there are workarounds for that. But Ableton is just such a powerful system for music creation that if it's your main tool to use for making music and you want to get into Atmos, try it out. Play with it. Download the trial from Dolby Atmos. I think it's 90 days, which is pretty good. That's enough time to play around with it and get your feet wet. The renderer itself, I think, is $299, which is not cheap, but it's just something that it's not $3,000 at least, right? And then you've got the plugins, and those keep going and going. The Hornet plugin, I think, is 59 euros, so it's not horrible. It's reasonable. And then, there's, like I said, there's a huge community out there. Go on the Dolby Atmos website, look at those studios in your area that are doing mixes in Dolby Atmos and have certified Dolby Atmos studios, and give them a call. Maybe they will allow you to bring your mix and kind of see how it sounds on their system, right? There's a few different ways you could do that. So, like I said, some places will allow you to bring your full computer, and other instances you might just bring the ADM file on a USB stick and plug it in. You can also, in a lot of cases, take a MP4 file, which you can export from the Dolby Atmos renderer and play that either through your iPhone on Atmos Music or Apple Music, or through your iPhone and pairing with an Apple TV. You can actually listen to how it sounds on home entertainment system. So there's a lot of different ways to actually get into the format without necessarily going out and buying the 12 speakers. Furthermore, there are people that are doing this on quite the budget. Speakers now are not too expensive. I'm using these little JBL 6-inch speakers. They're I think it's LSR 305s is what the model number is. They're original models. They don't make them anymore. You can find them on the market used for about $100 each, and maybe less sometimes. I bought a couple on Craigslist for like $50, and pretty soon I had all the speakers I needed, and I have an RME device that is capable of outputting 12 different outputs with the ADAT outputs, and I'm mixing in Dolby Atmos, right? Got my subwoofer set up and all my speakers, and I'm good to go. So I think 46 minutes at this point. I've talked long enough. I hope that you got something out of this. And if you like what you hear here, obviously subscribe. If you like some of the music, maybe check out my music on Apple Music or Spotify. It's on Woven Music. And I hope to be doing more of this. I love hacking these tools together and playing with audio and programming and things like that. So if you end up using this and doing a release, shoot me a tweet or an Instagram video or something like that. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear what you've produced and how I've helped you, get into this a little more. So that's about it. Again, thanks for everything, and I appreciate you, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.